Well, good morning, family. It is another episode of Unpublic with Citizen Stewart. Today, my guest is Naomi Shelton.
Hello, good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you as usual, Chris. How are you? Chris?
Yeah,
Like,
Chris,
wait.
you there? Uh, Today, my guest is Naomi Shelton, the Chief Executive Officer with Charter School Collaborative. Um, uh, she uh, um, she has been a friend for a long time. She has seen this work from many different angles. She, has been a starting out. Let's just start out with HBCU graduate from world famous Tupelo College in
That's right.
Mississippi,
That's
and since then has worked in politics, has worked in PR, has worked at the UNCF, has worked with a large national charter school chain, and now is working with a network for charter school leaders of color to provide them resources, fellowship, and advocacy, a much needed, I think, service for all of us. I don't know that people know this, but when we talk about charter schools, we are often talking about just a handful of well-known, charter brands nationally, but we often neglect to realize that there are many single site charter schools that came out of the communities that they live in. I know here in Minnesota, the majority of our charter schools come out of the communities that they serve. And by that, when I say they come out of, I mean literally people within that community say we need a school for our young and fill in the blank. We have schools for Latino youth. We have schools that cater to newly arrived Hmong students. We have Somali schools. We have single sex schools, a couple of them. None of those schools were designed and made the way that nationally people understand charter schools to be. They're not part of some CMO or some big management operation. So they need a different level of support. Glad to have Naomi on this morning to talk about it. Naomi, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Of course, have a jam-packed week. Later this evening, I'll be talking to three school leaders. Two are actually founders of schools, and one is in leadership at a charter school. To close out Women's History Month, but also to highlight how these women are doing their work and what is happening day to day and on the ground, and what brought them to the place of saying, I want to start my own school. And so, every day I'm either, receiving a phone call from someone who's having a challenge, who wants to learn more about the education landscape and wants to consider opening a school. So all the time, every day, I'm thinking about single site charter schools led by people of color, and how to make sure that they have access to the same capital, that they have access to the same resources, that they have access to the same professional development that's necessary to make sure that their schools are successful.
Yeah. I actually need to start the conversation by berating you a little bit, my friend, my sister.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, here it comes. Here it comes.
Anybody who knows us knows that is like a cornerstone of our relationship.
Here it comes. Brace yourself.
Right.
I've talked to you. I'm not going to name people, but a few people that I know that are either starting schools or within their first year or two of actually running a school, running an operation. Brilliant people, strong folks writing strong plans. They don't have to do this for a living. But you know what y'all all got in common?
What's that?
See, when you say I'm starting, I have a jam-packed week this week. We are a cult of busy. We are a doing too much crew. We are a network of doing the most. We are a network of going gray early, and not knowing why, right? And I just hereby right now want to end the cult of busy.
Busy. That's fair.
And I want to start a new cult, the cult of some gaps in your calendar.
Yes.
You want to join?
Actually, I'm in the process of joining that cult. So my birthday is Saturday, so I'm definitely going into this next rotation around the sun, being thoughtful about my vacation time, and just how I build time on my calendar. I definitely have blocks for me to meditate and all that other stuff, but I have noticed I've started to slow down on the multiple back-to-backs, except for this morning. Either way,
Right. See?
I am aware of it. And I think this time over the last year has really, reset for some people that you have to prioritize yourself, because otherwise you won't be here. And I have noticed there are several new gray hairs, and we don't know if that's because of the stress of the pandemic or all that, we've been juggling over the last year. So, transitioning to a new job during a pandemic I think that's a certificate level graduate course.
It should be.
Mhm.
And I'm specifically saying this to you this morning because you're in double trouble, double jeopardy. Number one, when young people, young leaders of color, Black folks start organizations where they are responsible for building a lot of the organization, which is a fairly common position for us to be in, where we get to follow somebody else in building or starting brand new with an organization, and we're the jack of all trades. We're trying to do it all.
Yeah.
That's a fairly common position, actually, in nonprofit world, and it's actually an untenable position. So we got to kind of rally around each other, and we got to make reminders with each other, like I'm reminding you today.
Yes.
Don't do that 24/7 thing.
Oh, listen, I have alarms set to tell me when to shut off. Now, does that always work? No. The problem, the other issue for me specifically is I do have a double load. I, of course, run this organization that was started by Kim Smith and Trish DeZico after their Baharis experience. And I'm, thankful for the work that they have carved out in this space. But I also serve as an authorizer, which those of you who know me and already know what I do, being an authorizer here in DC means that I am, when I close the books during the day, I then pivot and I'm thinking about the charter schools here in DC. So
and when you say authorizer, for people listening, Naomi sits on a board of in DC of an education board that authorizes charter schools, which is totally separate from her day work with the Charter Collaborative. Yes. So you are pulling double duty.
I am pulling double duty, and this is at the pivotal season. So every day I'm thinking about how are we doing, what's in the best interest of kids? What's the question every day we have to ask ourselves?
Yeah. I think actually, so I'm in a similar position, even as I'm giving you a hard time trying to run an organization. I'm actually in school myself right now, working on a couple of things, couple of projects that will be done in June. And then, people seek you out. They want you to sit on their advisory committee or on their board on different things. So I'm on a couple of boards, a couple of advisory committees. And at the same time, I've got multiple children still in the pipeline. So and a family, so
that's a lot.
It becomes a lot. And I think at times we glorify the grind. How we got to get it all done.
I'll say this. I'm an only child. My mother was significantly committed to raising me and her career. So of course that set a tone. But I will say this, when I was up late last night, I was planning vacations. I was planning where I will be as far out as November. So
wow.
I'm thinking about it. I'm definitely, keeping that balance, because we see far too often that Black men and women run themselves ragged and literally walk themselves into an early grave. And so I'm definitely trying to make sure that I'm here for the long haul. Later today, I'm celebrating a 50th birthday for one of my dearest and best friends. And so I want to make sure that I'm here to celebrate that milestone as well. And
there
more. And many more.
Well, I love the idea that you're planning out time for yourself. I've worried that, being in this new position that it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to give yourself time and gaps in your calendar because there's so much to do. You want to get it all done. You want to look like a good leader,
Yep.
You know, and all that stuff. But we're starting a different cult today. We're starting a cult of, you know, of sustainability.
That's right.
And it is not sustainable to be the one that's trying to do the most every day. I know. I'm saying this from personal experience.
I know that you're saying this to yourself as well.
I noticed that we have Emery Edwards in the comments. Emery is somebody who makes me jealous at times because if you watch Emery's social media feed, he'll be like cutting up bourbon chicken or like, you know, he got him a highball and some whiskey or you know, and some barbecue. And you're like, now see, this is somebody who understands how to keep it all going.
He really does. He really does. And, you know, thankfully, I have a whole family of folks in Indianapolis. I see David McGuire's in the comments as well. I cannot wait to get on a plane and like land in Indianapolis. One of the first places I'm going is Emery and his wife's backyard to have some of that smoked meat. Oh my gosh. My gosh.
I don't know. I'm going to go see Emery, and Emery, I love you and all, but Indy has this restaurant downtown that is like the best steaks I've ever had in my life. What is it called?
Izzy and Harry's? Is that what it's called?
Yeah. It's so good. And they got the really spicy shrimp cocktail that is just like beyond repair. So you see us reminiscing people. Right. We usually see each other at conferences, education conferences. We're usually traveling a lot to do this education work. It is a grind. I want people to know that when we do this work, that it is not cushy. And it is not the thing that we get criticized for being. It is not like, you know, some billionaire descended from a mountain with a bag of money and said, go forth and never work again. It's kind of the opposite, right? So I want people.
That was our way of finding balance, though, to be able to be in community with one another. And I that's one of the things I also am doubling down on. I think it's easy for us to say because we are, yes, Harry and Izzy's. Yes, I will be there the moment I touch down at Izzy, but there is one in the airport. Just the idea of like the community building and family in what we've built in terms of like this network of people who are all committed to thinking about this work and thinking about how we serve children and families and communities in very different ways than the ways we've been doing it. And so a lot of that is really focused on how do we make sure that we are taking care of ourselves and taking care of those around us. I was texting with Carrie Rodriguez the other day and, you know, just, one, I don't know how y'all juggle all of this with children. This is one of my babies. Thank you. And I have a dog. I have a senior citizen of a dog. But the work that you all do to care about this larger landscape and ecosystem, but also to have to take care of home.
You know, I feel like that is the point of today's show in some ways. We want to build new schools and build new opportunities for our young people as a goal. We have 8 million Black children. That should not be too many kids for us to get a world-class education in a first world country. That should not be like an unattainable goal to get every one of them. That not just a good education. Let's stop being so imprecise with our language. An education that sets them up to lead a good world in a very ruthless economy that has no kind of love for broke people. Right? So we want them to have an education that keeps them gainfully either employed or owning businesses or owning themselves and owning enterprises, owning land, owning houses, owning transportation, owning themselves in a country that was never designed for them to own themselves. That's the education that we want for them. So that I get the mission now, why we wake up every day kind of thinking like what the little bit of work that we have to do is so important. Like we really got to push. But you just said all the right stuff in all the right places. We need to build an ecosystem of educational people who are doing their different little parts. We need to build community around this because new schools won't last by themselves.
No, they don't. And one of the things that I enjoy about being a part of the independent authorizer here is that we do have a very different landscape. DC has been functioning in the charter space or operating charter schools for more than 25 years at this point. And the thought behind a lot of the schools that were started here were they were homegrown, that mom and pop single site. There's a specific need and curriculum that people wanted to create to make sure that they were able to serve that particular demographic and those students. You mentioned earlier the schools that serve either a single sex or that focus on a particular issue area. I think those are the types of schools that, fly under the radar and we don't talk about them. We don't think about the people that build schools, not only for the sake of saying, oh, I got to build a school, but they're building that school in mind for their own children, their nieces and nephews. They're thinking about their family members and the children that that community of children that their children are friends with. And I think the ways that people idealize neighborhood schools is what people have in mind. People of color have in mind when they create their schools as well.
Do you get the criticism around why not just, instead of building an entirely new system or new schools, why not try and just do this within the local school system that you have?
We do hear that. And I've recently spoken to a school leader in Prince George's County, Maryland. She started a school last year, worked within DCPS and transitioned and said, knowing how differently her children learned, she wanted to create an environment that met the different needs for different students. And what she found was working in a system that is willing to do that work of shifting, thinking about the work differently, thinking about how they deliver education and being able to constantly evolve. That is one thing. But when you have folks that are thinking about the work and the ways that they've done them within the systems, and then on top of that system, you have another layer of rules and regulations and the ways that they operate are not being progressive enough for them, right? And so there are families that are able to find that balance within traditional systems. There are people and leaders and teachers who are able to find a balance within systems, but there are people that recognize that systems don't always serve people the way that we want them to, or the ways that we need them to. And so they're looking for an alternative way.
If logic serves, it should be obvious that if people are seeking out to build new schools, that the existing ones, for one reason or another, aren't really working for them, right? I mean, it seems like a question that kind of answers itself, but I hear it all the time. Why would you start? Like, we don't have enough money to go around. I hear that oftentimes. We don't have enough money to be starting completely new schools. It's funny we find money for the stuff that we really want to happen.
That idea of this scarcity, right? People are operating from a model of there's only one pie. Instead of us being able to find ways to bake more pie, right? And I use that quote. My friend Brittany Packnett Cunningham says that all the time. Like, where there's enough, there's more than enough, and we know we can make more. There are people who, or I should say, there is a person in this country right now who makes more money every minute than people would even dream of, right? Right? Why are we not thinking about ways to tap into, and the money that we're spending on all of these things that make other people rich, redirecting that money? People often say that charters are siphoning money away from school districts.
I hate that.
I hate it too.
I hate it. Yeah.
I hate it too. And I've also heard people say that, once a charter school was created, and if they were serving a particular population, generally a population that school districts typically don't serve well, that the school district was like, yes, please take these children, right? So there are times when they're like, yes, you can take these kids off our hands, and that the arguments are very broad stroke when we know that the differences between jurisdictions, states, cities, what all of those things look like from place to place are very different. But what we do know is that the resources are not equitably distributed to Black and brown serving schools.
No.
Or traditional. The equity is just not there. And until we have equity, we should be able to pull the lever we need to pull.
Yeah, we know for a fact that all the research tells us that the equity is just not there.
Mhm.
So let's stop pretending like, all things being equal. Here's another one, my favorite one is, well, if charter schools are so good, why wouldn't they be in rich areas? Why don't the rich people want them? Because the real goal, we'll tell you why. The real goal is everybody should have schools like they have in those rich neighborhoods or rich suburbs or rich areas or whatnot. And I'm like thinking oftentimes, that's your dream. That's
Mhm.
your dream because that's your family. So you think that's the end all that be all. We're in the middle of a 400-year fight for the black brain. There's no arguing with me. We don't argue. What do you mean? So keep your version of your beautiful little Pleasantville
Mhm.
schools, and hold that for yourself, where everybody wears a Mr. Rogers kind of like sweater and walks around
Right.
like, father knows best bullshit. You keep that for yourself and your people, and let your little folks, and let my people go. That's
Right.
all I want to say. Just let my
And
people go.
the thing is that we've also seen examples over, the time from when Mike Brown was unfortunately killed to now, that you're hearing in more and more middle class and upper middle class Black people say that they now realize that the schools where they were sending their children that met that quota of, oh, I want to have the very rich white private school experience, that they're
Mm-hmm.
realizing that those schools don't serve their children well, right? That they're subjecting their children to all types of racism, any other biases, all the other things that come along with being in environments that are not created for you and by people who look like you and care about you. And so I think the community building and the distraction that we're oftentimes hearing does not keep in mind that there are people who understand and are willing to shift how we think about education to the benefit of not only the students and the children that come to their classrooms every day, but thinking about how do you wrap around families.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that there are some school districts that are able to do that and they do it really well, but there are others that by evidence of one too many Karen videos that we've seen, that just are not worried about or thinking about Black
Right.
children and serving Black and Latino children. And it's painful to know that folks are willing to um, put their futures on hold for the sake of what adults want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're constantly being asked to put things on hold or to take something that is less, like, wait, be patient.
Mhm,
It's the classic
mhm,
letter from a Birmingham jail. Um, let's just fix the schools we already have. Doesn't that
mhm.
sound like a dumb ass like thing to say to one of us? Like if somebody's like really wanting to pitch us something as a good idea, hey, how about you stay in the schools that we built for you that are giving you a substandard education and just wait until we
Just
fix
wait.
all of them,
And
right?
we've been waiting, and
We've
that's
been
part of
waiting.
the reason why a lot of the parents who do choose alternative options, like i.e. charter schools, because they did wait and they saw how waiting and their parents waiting affected them.
Yeah.
And we all know, based on research, that parents, no matter what their economic circumstances are, they care about what happens with their children. And they're dedicated to finding alternative pathways to get them what they either know their children deserve because they experienced it, or
Hmm.
they know because they didn't get what was the best of the best.
Yeah, it feels simple to me, like right now, just logic works this way. We know what we're getting right now.
Mhm.
So we could predict what the future is going to be 10 years, 12 years from now, based on what
Mhm.
we have right now, because we're predictable people. We understand the
Mhm.
world. We see patterns. We have
I was
pattern
gonna say
recognition.
patterns. That's
Black
right.
people are intelligent. We understand patterns,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So here's a pattern. If we keep what we have right now, 10 years from now, 12 years from now, we'll be talking about the same things we're talking about today. So why don't we start today with alternative education,
That's
alternative schools, alternative ways of doing things, only because we want an alternative future.
right.
Only because we're looking for some other ending, like one of
Right.
those. What do they call the movies where you pick your own end, like pick your own adventure or
Oh, I
something
know
like
what you
that?
mean. Yes, 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 yes.
Yeah, we're looking for that.
Right. We're looking for that. And I think one of the things that when you say we're accustomed to patterns, that also means that we get comfortable in those patterns instead of stretching ourselves. I haven't finished the book, so I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in it. But in what I've started with Emergent Strategies is that what are the ways that we can build community in different ways? Like when we talk about Afrofuturism, which, can some people, I don't know where you are on that, Chris, because we haven't had a chance to break bread at a conference. Because I can just hear you be like, I don't understand that term. But how are we thinking about creating a future that doesn't based on something that doesn't exist, right? And people being really comfortable with like following a pattern. Let me say this, and either you or I or both of us end up having a mic drop moment. The patterns that I've seen from this country have been that we are comfortable with mass shootings, right? We're comfortable with the idea of two-parent, 2.5 kids and a dog. We're comfortable with all of those things, but we've also seen that those patterns have left us in the place of looking back and reflecting and saying, oh, do you remember 25 years ago when X, Y, and Z happened? This is a reminder of that. So what are we doing differently? So I don't see the purpose of us saying, let's follow that pattern when that pattern has not landed us in a place where we're better off.
No, it's just made us comfortable, but it hasn't. I love your point about Afrofuturism. I'm just putting it up here for folks to see. Afrofuturism has always looked forward. How can the ideology serve as a blueprint for cultural growth? I think that's a great question to ask right now, just because we do want an alternative future. That's why we build schools. That's why we have pipelines where we want more Black teachers. That's why we have people like arguing and fighting about what should be the best pedagogy for Black folks, and why I'm starting now to argue about what should be the best andragogy. Like, how do we teach adults at the same time that we're teaching young people? And I love your work in how do we build ecosystems? How do we build community around the idea of our own freedom? And hopefully not even hopefully, logically speaking, us doing all those things would not lead to anything except for a little bit better, or at least somewhat better than what we have now, breaking up the patterns. I noticed that, I want to ask you a couple of questions just about the organization and critical questions about the movement. So one would be, you guys serve charter leaders of color, but the majority of those are Black. Are you seeing, when you think about the issues that the schools themselves and the leaders themselves face, are, marginally different from Black to other groups, or is it, people of color have a pretty common story to tell about their leadership, about their frustrations, about what they're working on?
So I generally hear more so about what's happening with Black schools, not to say that what's happening with Latino or Hispanic led schools isn't a concern. But what I'm hearing more so is that the closures, all the other things that happen in a systemic way happen more often to Black led schools. And it is also regional. I will say that my familiarity is more so with the East Midwest to East Coast versus the West. And that would be where majority of the schools, so the West, Texas. I always wonder, should we call Texas the South, or is that the Midwest? Southwest, right? But thinking about what's happening in those
Southwest,
places,
Southwest, okay.
That some of that just doesn't trickle over as much. That news doesn't trickle over in the same ways. And so I'm in the process of building out relationships and network with organizations that work directly with some of the communities that are not necessarily heavily populated or that I have access to here.
Yeah. So in some ways, you're seeing more of the Black schools for now, and you're hearing more of what they're working on. Over time, you're probably going to hear more from other communities.
Absolutely.
I know first of all, I'd like everybody to know that Minnesota, where I live, is the birthplace of the charter school. Just so you know, you're welcome. You're welcome. We've given you a few things in life. We keep trying. We gave you open enrollment. We gave you PSEO. We gave you dual enrollment. We gave you site-based management. To some extent, we gave you magnets, and we also gave you charter schools. So we're giving people, but y'all just don't know what to do with it.
But
you know.
what is all that work giving us in terms of outcomes? Now, I'm not saying
Now you just starting a fight. Now you
right.
just
I don't want to do that. Why? Because we're turning a new page and we need to think about how to not stress ourselves out. The thing is that when you have all those things, when you have all those options, when you have all those ways of showing up, it all depends on who's at the table,
yeah,
how
yeah.
they are thinking about serving students in the best ways possible. And we know that the access, Ray said it earlier, with 7% of teachers being Black, that is, that decreases the number of people that are at the table within a school, a district, right? Then how many Black administrators do we have? What does that look like? Where are we showing up in all these spaces, and our voices loud enough? And one of the ways that the work that NCC is focused on, the National Charter Collaborative is focused on, is creating that exceptionally strong web of people that are thinking about this work as a collective. I just talked to Dawn Chavis in Philadelphia yesterday about some challenges that they are having with the charter landscape there. And they've created the African American Charter Coalition. And that may be wrong about what the acronym is, because right now I know 50,000 acronyms. But all of that to say that the challenges that they're having in terms of the inequities, all of those things the same could be said for many urban centers. But the constant is that Black schools are not getting what they deserve and what they need. Again, DC shows up very differently, but we have majority of the schools that have closed here have been Black led. And so how we're thinking about that, how are we connecting those dots so people don't feel like they're fighting these battles in isolation, that they're not considering these things and coming up with what are the solutions and or what are the demands that they need to be making collectively, so that people don't feel like they have to do that on their own.
I mean, I think that's really the way the system is designed, is to make you think that you're on your own in a lot of the work that you're doing. So the real power is in collecting together, like having each other's back and forming ecosystems. We talked at the beginning of this show with the very important message that I think some people may have, like, one troll that we have in the comments is like, so we just going to talk about food now? And we just, well, let me just say this: taking care of yourself and building networks around you makes the work more sustainable. So stop trying to do for yourself and start moving as a team, right? To get some of these things done. I really wonder about if we say enough about how we're not just trying to build new kinds of schools, or we're not just trying to be part of a policy prescription, but we really are thinking that, like, in the comments, I saw David is with us this morning in the comments, David McGuire. When I think about Black educators, there's a couple of things that I expect of them or want from them, which is Black educators have always been in the business of creating new pedagogy for our children that doesn't exist in the main system. But after a certain point in history, we lost a lot of them. So when I see people like David, who are younger, who are coming up the ranks right now, who have a place to try new things and a place to learn, that, and then a place like a laboratory where you can share that with others as we learn, because we have fraternity with each other. That to me is bigger than just being about a policy.
That is, it's so much bigger than that. And as I hear you talking about that, and knowing that we had a very tight-knit ecosystem of Black educators in our country, and that we can continue to have that, but we have become this very siloed. We've had this very siloed experience over time, and so how does NCC think about this? We think about this as, how do we develop a peer-to-peer network, and make sure that what the learnings that people have taken over time are then recycled back to make sure that folks know how they can be successful. Consultancy, making sure that we have a bench of people that are able to impart their expertise to folks to make sure that they are shifting their work to have a more high-performing school. We have a fellowship that does a deeper dive with leaders to think through how they can have a shared problem practice, but then come out with solutions, and then advocating for them, right? And so thinking about the ways that, have you heard of BNOLA, Black Educators for New Orleans?
I was in the first meeting. So yes, I was in the first meetings of be known. I just like it to be known. And
Okay.
guess what was involved?
Well, just the idea of making sure that you're connecting educators. That's a way of
Yes.
like that informal like codifying of the work, and making sure that that ecosystem is constantly churning that information so that we don't lose what we know to be true. And for instance, right now we have a community of practice that is focused on codifying the special education practices of Black leaders and how they've implemented that not only in their day-to-day when we were in person, but also how they've been able to do that work virtually. And in codifying those things, we're able to demonstrate to people and have it, and we're working with a research partner and thinking through how do we make sure that we say that we're not just by anecdote saying that these schools are doing this more effectively, but that we have demonstration of what they were doing, how they were doing it, and that way it can be replicable. You know what I'm trying to say.
I got you.
You got me.
Yes, I'm not going to try it myself because I'm going to have a hard time, but I got it.
The whole thing. So making sure that we actually know what we're doing. And that is the thing that ends up happening. What ends up slowing us down is people are looking around and they're like, well, I'm not sure. How do we make sure that we have it all pulled together? We have people having a network of people talking about it and seeing that that is actually, oh, you had success with this, so let me try that as well. It is absurd that we don't do more of that. And so how do we create? Our goal is to create that type of ecosystem for the leaders of these schools and that they are in constant communication with one another. They're learning lessons. One of the things that I said a few years ago in dealing with some of the closures here is I said to some of the other Black leaders, how often do y'all talk? How often do you check on one another? How often, was there no one to say, excuse me, your slip is showing? Like, how are we doing that work?
Yeah.
And hopefully what we can do with NCC is build a space and a network and build a community that it isn't frowned upon to get that feedback, but it is seen as like you lifting as we're all trying to climb. This is work that we all have to do exceptionally well because everyone else around us is making sure or at least standing by to see if and whether or not we'll fail.
Yeah, I tend to believe that God breaks up answers into pieces and gives them to different people like a puzzle on purpose to make it so that they're interdependent and they have to come to each other. I actually think that God purposely doesn't put answers in the same place, but breaks them up.
Yep.
Yeah, but
how do you lean into the synergy of, I know that this person has the answer to that. So let me, even though they're in California and you are in Maine, let me connect the two of you because there's these problems that are just resurfacing and people have already figured them out.
In nonprofit world writ large, not just in education, but in nonprofit world writ large, you're going to have a peer in another organization that you can tap into who's better with budgets. And one who's better with fundraising and one who's better with like kind of management of staff. And you're going to be, oftentimes thrown into a situation where you're having trouble with all those things.
That's right.
Like you're going to have 2 or 3 staff members that are driving you to drink. And you're going to be like, is it me? Like, so it's nice to have a person to talk to who's like good with that. One thing that people are not really good with either too, where it's hard to find a mentor, strategy.
Yes. Oh my God.
Like strategy. I only have a couple of people that I think are like my aces when it comes to strategy. I could tell them any scenario and they're just like, they take it up a couple levels. And they're like, well, what's your strategy for handling that? And I tell them my strategy and it sounds real foolish. And then they kind of break it apart.
But I think that idea, and that's supposed to be the purpose of a board, right? The purpose of a board is to have people with different expertise come together to help you be strategic, to help you think through and pick through the pieces of the puzzles to say, let's bring all these things together. One of the things that I want to make sure we say before we end today. I know we have 20 minutes, but before we end today, if we don't build our own network, we know that there's a network willing to undo the work that we have done.
Ooh, yeah.
Right? There are people, and I say this, and everybody, Chris, you've known me long enough to know that I am very, very passionate about the work that I commit myself to. There are people who are bending over backwards to share, to think about, to like be collective in their destruction of what it is that we are trying to build. And it's covert, it's below the radar, and one, I think we should spend more time calling it out. We should spend more time being as deliberate as they are. And how do we make sure that we are like our strategy outthinks them? And until we are able to look, to really pick up our heads and really everybody turn and look around and say, this isn't really about the type of system, it's about, we know what is happening for kids. Let's get to the business of making sure that they have what they need. Not about protecting our, oh, I want to make sure I still have a job. I've heard that in strategic planning sessions with people who do not look like you or me. But how are we thinking about how are the children? Like, that question needs to be the center of what it is that we do. Again, to Ray's point, 7% of teachers are Black. Less than 2% are Black males. But the ways that Black people show up in defense of people that are actively working against Black children and brown children is not helpful. And so how are we building our own ecosystem? How are we building our own network to think about that work for our own?
David is saying two things in the comments here that I think are important. One is we need a more open source platform of resources for leaders who are serving Black children. He also says every Black leader in this work needs a front row, the people who will hold you accountable, but also who look out for you. And let the church say amen. Like some good old fashioned Christian accountability on these things. I wonder why. Go ahead.
We also just mention that there are. So today, my board chair for the charter boards shared a Brookings article that talks about the online forum that GC Urban Moms and how they talk about education. And so I want to just be clear that when we say urban moms, we are not talking about the community that needs the most support. And in that report, outlining very, very deliberately how this network of people talking about and having a churn of talking points, discussion, sharing data, how that shows up, right? And how that looks very differently than the ways that people assume that we operate. And so how are we being as deliberate about making sure that we're talking about our work, that collective work, whether you're in traditional or in the charter or even alternative and private? How are we building out our own ecosystem of conversation to make sure that we're on the same page? And that's really the crux of what I want to get to, is that they are very deliberate about how they have a pattern, and they're very comfortable in that pattern. How are we breaking free of that pattern and building our own?
Say more about the report. So Brookings Institute has a report on what specifically?
So they took a significant look at an online forum here in DC, and how that forum is also really rooted in neighborhoods, socioeconomic level, and that they talk about what happens within their schools in a very deliberate way, but not thinking about the families and the people that are disadvantaged or don't have access to the same things. And so they talk about public school in this really nuanced way, where they're talking about what their experiences are, but there's no one there to counter that with their own experience. That looks differently than that. And so how do we think through the ways that we should be talking about, and not to say infiltrate, but how are we talking about these things to counter this very, what did you say, leave it to Beaver earlier? I don't think it was
Pleasantville. Leave it to Beaver,
Yeah. And so they sell themselves on that, and they believe that that is true for everyone. And we know that that is not the case.
You
You
know
know?
what? Like, it's the most kind of distressing thing that I think about our fight in when it comes to advocacy, which is kind of the white niceties and what I'm calling the new Jane Crow, like
Mm,
this large group of white women mothers who work with white teachers to create this kind of dreamy
mhm.
scenario about what the American public school is, without taking in any type of consideration of how that has worked for people that don't happen to be white mothers and white women teachers. So people forget that, like, educational injustice has always been managed by white women in and out of schools. So when I say the new Jane Crow, like in desegregation times, it was white mother groups. And they didn't have Facebook back then, but they had phones and cocktail hours and all kinds of things to help them maintain the disadvantage that we had then in education. And
Mhm.
today they do have Facebook and other ways to maintain the disadvantage
That's right.
that we have. When they are talking about schools, they are talking about a dreamy world in which their children are getting everything that they need through the system. So the system must be good. And
That's right.
anybody who comes to disrupt the system or break it up
Mhm.
anyhow, or to remove some people from it, it's a material mortal threat to their dream, to
Right.
their understanding of the world. And then they find, they have a whole fancy language around it: disruptors and deformers. And
Mhm.
so they don this kind of like fake revolutionary resistance language about maintaining the system exactly as how it's been for all these years. And there's one of those Facebook groups in every city.
Yep.
So anytime you start trying to change boundaries that are going to change whether or not little, Brittany gets into the Spanish immersion school at the very certain kind of magnet school, all hell breaks loose,
That's right.
right? You go try to change any of that stuff in any city and watch what happens.
Oh, I've heard one too many stories about a particular Black leader here. And I heard it, one, through the grapevine of education, but then two, directly from a parent, where they were really undermining the work of this Black school leader, who was in the traditional system, an outstanding leader, of course, HBCU educated, but also truly dedicated to not only her craft, but to children. And the ways that those mothers showed up to like dismantle everything that she had built over time. And this isn't something where she just landed at the school, it was there for one school year and they backed her out. She had been there for quite some time. And the progressive white moms essentially pushed her out of that school.
Mm,
How are we thinking about what it meant for those children who do not look like that woman, for those children to see her every day, persisting, caring about their needs, and being a really thoughtful leader, and that for her to no longer be there? What tone does
mm,
that set? What tone does
mhm.
that set that now we've replaced this Black woman? What is that?
And why she's been replaced? What tone does it set that a group of white women parents, because this is the way it goes down in many places, a principal, a superintendent, somebody's going to get squeezed out somewhere because this group has collected. But when a comparable group of people of color are low income people come together, it takes two times the number of them to get anything done,
And
right?
I'm picking up on unfortunate signals here in DC that there are progressive, and I say that with quotation
I was
marks,
about to say progressive what? Yeah.
progressive folks that are thinking about this in terms of like, how do they now get Black voices to be the microphone
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
them? How
Hmm.
do they then see this idea of distrust for the charter system, but have Black people be the face of it? Because people have called them out and said directly that they're being racist. But then when you have folks who are not within the spaces that we are, or see all these things as
Hmm.
problematic, instead of recognizing like, what is this, like, what does it look like to really get free? um
And they're going to find the people that they want. You're talking specifically about groups like that look
Mhm.
for a black face or a brown face, they often find some rare person, some
Mhm.
Candace Owens of a person that has specific reasons to be detached from their own community and not
Mhm.
see the power in their own community, but
Mhm.
it's a black face. And that
That's
person comes and shows up and says, well, it can't be racist because I believe it too. Or, it's somebody who wants to run for office the
right.
next year or the year after. So
Mhm.
they start adopting all the talking points. Listen,
That's
y'all gonna stop playing with us right now. Here's one of the reasons why we want new schools that are run by our own people, that are creating our own pedagogy or whatnot.
right.
This is why. Because
That's
Black American children are being trapped in a house that's burning, and they're trying to make a run for the exits. And you got people like saying, no, you shouldn't be able to get out of this burning house. You should stay in here while we find some water. We're looking for it now. And
We're
you're
looking
saying,
for
well,
the
wait a
water.
second. Now your children have a whole ass swimming pool over
And they've
there.
been right, and
Yeah.
they've been at the pool the whole time.
Yeah,
Right.
they've been in the pool the whole time. They're swimming, and our folks are in the burning. Yeah, I know, but just stick with it. Stick with us. Why bolt for the doors? Why bolt for the exits or whatnot? Do you know what's on the other side of those doors? Yeah,
I
not
mean,
fire.
right. Air, right?
Air.
Clean air.
Right.
One of the things, and I remember this when Sean Hartnett and the team at Statesman was coming up with their school when they were going through their application process, and the ways that these women wrote public comment to say that. So the ways, how that you have homeroom and all the different ways that you create culture within your school, and they wanted to break the cohorts up and call them crews, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Crew, right?
mm-hmm,
That sounds to me very nautical, which
mm-hmm,
also
mm-hmm,
seems very white.
mm-hmm.
You know that there was public comment that commented and said that is gang affiliated terminology.
Oh, stop. No, stop it. Stop.
So
Stop.
literally, people are bending over backwards to find problems with things that would resolve the issue. This is what I'm starting to come up with. They don't want us to resolve any of these things because they know that all of the ways that they say that they demonize Black people would all be erased if we were able to just take care of ourselves.
Well, I mean, let's be real about this. When I say the new Jane Crow, who
Mhm.
are the majority of the teachers? Who are the majority of the social workers? Who are the majority of the pensions that are invested in our existence staying in these schools? So the head count, the Black head count in the American public school is profitable. It's profitable for entire professions in which we don't have a lock on those professions. So
Mhm.
when you start talking about reducing head count in the main system, you are talking about literal dollars. You're talking about people's trip to Costco. You're talking about their trip to Yellowstone in the summertime. You're talking about the braces for their kids. We need to get real honest about
Mhm.
the fact that building schools is a strategy for success, and that is not. It's a strategy for liberation. That is not a slogan. That is not like something we
It's
say to each other and don't really mean. No,
literally how we're going to get people free.
that is literally how we're going to create an alternative future, disrupt the system right now that is chewing us up like gristle, like
Right
chewing our kids up.
right now, the 5 schools, the 5 people, the 5 groups that had the determination to submit applications for new schools that would not open this fall but would open next year. Um, those 5 people, all of those 5 groups, all of color, right?
Hmm,
I think
hmm.
there's one of the 5 that it is a mixed panel of folks, but like in terms of their first layer of leadership. But when you think about it, this idea of, so one of them is a micro school, a Montessori school.
I love that.
And when you think about it, what who has micro or pods right now?
Hmm, hmm,
White,
hmm.
wealthy families. So now when people are trying to create replicate that same idea for Black people, specifically in the 2 wards that are most disadvantaged here in the city, now it's all of a sudden a problem.
Hmm, hmm. Anything, listen, what's
And
good for us is not good for y'all. That is the ethos of, what's good for us. Um,
and
um,
and the
why would
biggest
you want to escape?
Right. The
You
biggest
know,
pushback, the loudest, not the loudest voice, but one of the few folks, because there were tons of people who testified in support of a good number of these schools that have applied. But one of the loudest voices, or one of the people that had the most influence, was a Black woman saying that, basically undermining two of the applicants, but not, I don't, and I know she realized that they are Black, but just saying, well, they're not from the community. And why are we trying to gatekeep people that have been doing this work, people that have been in different portions of this ecosystem and have a really good understanding of the lay of the land and should be able to put forth application?
I just can't, Naomi. Like, listen, if the new Jane Crow doesn't kill us in education, mass education and mass incarceration are siblings with each other. I want to keep saying this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these people are literally invested. Their pensions are literally invested in private prisons and child detention centers. And if you need me to prove that on another show, I'll do
The
it.
data is there.
So don't play with me on this one. But our own people who come and join the wrong team, for all the wrong reasons, we got to do something with our special Lord touched people in our community.
Oh, I love that alliteration. Brainwash Black blockers. Yes.
Yeah, we got to do something with them because you know what it feels like. It feels like the movie Us. It feels like we don't know which one we're dealing with sometimes. Are you the underground you? Or are you the overground you? Because
and then of course that then makes us question ourselves, right? I feel like I'm being gaslit. I'm like, well, am I wrong for wanting to do something different, right?
Yeah.
And I legitimately, I'm an ambivert or an ambivert. I don't know which one is what, but I will say this: like, I know what it means to like live in groupthink. I know what that means. But I also know what it means to like be cool with not having to do the status quo. And so what is so wrong with the idea of us taking what is meant to, taking what we know that will work for our kids and building what we know will work for our kids? Let's replicate it, right? And that it becomes too difficult because you have not only the folks who don't look like us, but then you have the Black people that adopt whatever they need to feel empowered and to assimilate to whatever that is that makes them feel better about that other side of the fence.
Well, that's a good place to kind of land. These shows often end with a question that actually is a whole nother show, which I like. And this is what I'll say about that last point, because I think it's critical for us to understand. When you said assimilate, it gets my brain thinking in this way. All of America is built on racial collectivism. As much as we talk about the rugged individual, the Irish, the Italian, the Jews, the Asians, everybody has figured out that dollar needs to go through their community multiple times if they ever want to have a fighting chance as being seen as free, as seeing as having capital in this country. Black people are the one group of people, the one human population who we consistently tell you'll be better off with fewer options, with less power over the systems that govern you, with less kind of like access to the same things that have made everybody else successful, right? So our racial collectivism in education should be very clear. Like our interest in racial collectivism for our own education should be clear, because we need to own the means of production of knowledge. We need to own that. And everybody else has figured it. So when you fight with the new Jane Crow folks, what they are fighting for is to maintain their dominance and the control over the system that educates their kids. Because they understand that is power. That is power. It's nothing else but power. And when you start taking that away from them, it makes them very insecure. It makes them feel like, oh my God, we might end up with a Black president and a Black vice president and a Black Congress one day. Let's stop this. Let's stop this now.
We're experiencing that here in DC when it comes to statehood, right? And the fact that people are really and truly making excuses as to why we don't need to be a state. We pay federal taxes. If we don't deserve to be a state, give me money back, right? But the idea of the collectivism of a majority Black space led by the right people, the people that are going to be committed to that work, people are definitely afraid of that. Right. And so how do we keep the thumb on folks versus allowing people to just thrive, because we can always make more pie, just to bring it full circle. us having what we need does not stop them from doing whatever they want to do. I just don't want to be at the
And
mall.
even if it did stop you, even if you had to give something up, you're looking in the face of people that have a 400-year priority on being able to be as free as they damn well please. Like free to educate how we want to or whatnot. This is not negotiable. This is what will it do to the system? I don't give a damn what it does to your system if we pull our kids out. Well, what will it do to our jobs? And, but I don't give a damn. What I really care about is that we get honest with each other and have some racial realism with saying, basically, you're still living under that mode of like, kill the Indian, save the man, which was the old ethos. You think by integrating and assimilating us into your program, we will come out more like the ones you want us to be. That's cultural suicide. We're not doing that no more. So anyways, well, we're at the end of our hour. Naomi Shelton from the Charter School or the National Charter Collaborative that leads hundreds of advocates for and builds fellowship for hundreds of charter school leaders of color. What are your final words? How can people find you? How can they support your work?
You can find us on the internet at chartercollab.org. This evening, if you have Clubhouse, we'll be hosting a conversation at 7 p.m. Eastern. So please join that. Please follow us on Twitter. We are ramping up and having more dialogue on our social media. And feel free to find me. And my Twitter handle is Naomi Shelton DC.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for watching. We appreciate you coming every morning, spending an hour with us, putting such insightful comments into the comments for us so that I can read them later and think through what should be new show ideas and what should we pull on more. Let's save our kids. Let's build our own solutions. Let's build an alternative future. We can do it, but we